Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, of course. And I absolutely love talking to dentists about student loans. And I would say just in general, just if I could summarize what we do in one sentence, maybe is we are a group of student loan nerds that love nerding out about student loan strategies and everything like that. To hopefully alleviate some of the stress and pain that can come along with a big student loan balance. But yeah, that is what we do day in, day out. We eat, sleep, and breathe student loan policy at this point. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And I guess one thing we could do, just to make sure everyone can maybe submit a question or maybe submit a chat, just to make sure that's working. If someone wants to put in where they're at, like where they're from right now, in either the Q&A, I guess if we're doing a Q&A or a chat, just to test that out.
Yeah, you guys can drop where you're hailing in from in the chat.
Awesome. DC. All right, so it looks like that's working. Okay, yeah, and we will make sure we leave the last. I like to leave about 5 or 10 minutes at the very end for Q&A. So obviously, a lot of what we talk about, it could spark some questions along the way for someone's specific situation. No, I can't. I will say that I can't offer specific advice without knowing more about your student loans, but I can answer some general questions about kind of what's going on in the student loan world. So we'll make sure we earmark the last 5 or 10 minutes for that. So. Okay. Um, I will start by sharing my screen. So, as we just mentioned, student loan policy has shifted dramatically over the past, we'll call it since March of 2020, with the COVID forbearance period that really started to kick in. So, we've seen a number of different repayment plans come up and go away and are set to go away. It's almost like a never ending thing in our world, which is, a lot of times is job security for what we do, right? Because if it stayed stagnant, there wouldn't be as much of a need for what we do in a consulting service. And I would just like to point out the fact that like student loans, um, while they like maybe amongst the general population, they definitely have a negative connotation about like, why do you have so many student loans, right? And a lot of people don't realize that student loans are really the gateway for you to be able to do what you do and earn the income that you do as a dentist, right? And I just kind of like point that out to a lot of people because you can feel really, working with hundreds of dentists at this point, it could feel not great to have these student loans, right? But at the end of the day, you have these student loans because you went through the training to earn the income that you're going to earn over time, which as a dentist, you tend to earn the top 10% of income in this whole country, right? As a dentist and as a dental specialist. And you couldn't have earned that income in the future without these student loans, right? Think of these student loans as like you taking these out as in the payments along the way as a true investment to earn that income over time, which can be a very lucrative career over time. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm very optimistic about dentistry and as long as you have a plan in place for the student loans. So. So Student Loan Planner, we have advised over 21,000 clients, close to $5 billion dollars in student loan debt. Um, Dentists and dental specialists are number two professions right behind physicians. And then we have veterinarians and attorneys after that. Typically, if you have to go to school for a long time for training, chances are like you're good candidates for what we do because there's a lot of money at stake in terms of strategies that we're going to talk about today. We've projected there's a projected $1.7 billion dollars of savings on that $5 billion dollars of debt. So if we can identify that one specific action will save $20,000 over the course of your repayment timeline, for example, we add that to our little tracker for our savings. And yeah, and if you want to use this QR code, you can find out more about what we do as Student Loan Planner. Studentloanplanner.com is our website. So, okay, so I'll start at a very general sense here. When it comes to the different paths to handle your student loans, it's either you should be aggressive and pay them off at the lowest interest possible, or you should be passive and pay the least of every month's payment, right? So just pay your minimum payment and then build wealth outside of your student loans with the remaining cash flow. It's one of the two, typically, is what we want to stress. If you go in between and you're like, okay, well, I'm a good candidate for forgiveness, and we'll talk about in this slide what makes you a good candidate for forgiveness. But if you still pay extra on your loans to avoid the interest from accruing, technically you'd be better off by not paying any extra on your loans for most people, and I'll explain why. But what we look at for whether or not you're a good candidate for forgiveness, if your balance is less than your annual income, so let's say your balance is $100,000, which there's not a lot of dentists with $100,000 balances. Typically a little bit more than that. But if that's, less than your $150,000 of income, you are a good candidate to just pay those off, right? So if you have a 7% rate on your federal student loans, you can refinance right now to like a sub 5% rate at a lot of places. And you can just refinance and to a 10-year refi or 20-year refi and, pay those off in accordance with the rest of your debt, right? So most dentists that I talk to, especially newer dentists, are at least in camp two or camp three, right? So if their balance is between 1 to 2 times the income, it really depends on which repayment plan you're eligible for, which we'll talk about in a later slide. Um, but it depends on how long you've been paying up to this point. Because if you only have a few years to go in your forgiveness plan, then it might make sense to still be passive on your student loans, even if your income is getting close to your balance. So, and then the third would be if your balance is greater than 2 times your annual income. So if your annual income is 150 and your balance is 300 or more, chances are you're a great candidate for forgiveness versus paying them off. And it'll be most cost effective for forgiveness versus paying them off over time. So, so the reason why somebody in camp three or camp two would be good candidates for forgiveness is simply because of income-driven repayment plans, right? So no matter what your balance is, um, I should rewind a little bit. Sometimes it matters what your balance is, but for the most part, if your balance is $1 million, your payment will always be based off of the income that you show when you apply for these plans. So it can be your $1 million of balance, and if your income's 150, the payment will always be based off of the 150 of income, right? And so when we go back to this slide, we're saying like, if your balance is greater than 2 times your annual income, effectively what that means is that your payments calculated based off of your income will not pay off the balance within the forgiveness timeline, right? And then actually, it would make more sense to still be passive and get the rest forgiven at the end of that versus being aggressive and paying them off. Because somebody in this camp, their income driven payment might be high enough to just pay off the balance anyway of before the timeline's forgiven over time. So, and that's what makes federal student loans different than any other debt in this world. There's no other debt, to my knowledge, that have income driven repayment plans out there. They just look at your balance and your interest rate and amortize your loan, car loans, mortgages, credit cards, personal loans, you name it, and they just calculate your payment based off of that. So, federal student loans are a different animal when it comes to strategies here because of the income-driven repayments. So, and got that in there. Okay. Um, so the income-driven repayment plans available right now, it depends on when you first took out your student loans. So we have number one here, the RAP plan. It's called the Repayment Assistance Program. This is going to be brand new starting this July 1st, 2026. This was created from the tax bill passed in 2025, and everyone is eligible for RAP, right? So and then the payment amount depends is either what it ranges from 1 to 10% of your income, but if your income is $100,000 or more, it's going to be 10% of your income. And if you do not pay off your loans within 30 years on the RAP plan, the rest of your balance will be forgiven on the RAP plan. 30 years is a long time. That's been the longest forgiveness timeline of any plan. out there in the history of income-driven repayment plans. Most dentists, uh, what we do know is income dramatically increases over a 30-year time frame in dentistry, just in general. It just does over time. That's what we see in the data. And so the idea that you get to use your $150,000 income for the rest of the next 30 years for your income-driven repayment plan is probably pretty low. And so there's not a ton of dentists that will qualify for RAP forgiveness because it is such a long time frame, right? The second one here, new IBR, puts a lot more dentists in the forgiveness path. If you borrowed your loans, including undergrad loans, if your first federal student loans were borrowed in July 1st, 2014 or later, so 12 years ago, a little bit less than 12 years ago, you qualify for this new IBR plan, which is 10% of income, but it's only 20 years. And if you've been making payments for the past few years, those are still going to count towards IBR forgiveness, right? So you might already have 3 years down and you might be making payments off of dental school income, which a lot of times is zero, or maybe like the first year out of dental school where you have like kind of like that half year of income. And so you might already have a lot of payment count towards forgiveness and only have like 17 years to go. And it would actually make more sense for you to pursue forgiveness on new IBR by making the minimum payment of 10% of discretionary income, which we'll talk about how to calculate that over time, uh, to just be passive and just invest on the side or pay down other debt outside of these student loans versus being aggressive on these loans. So, and then the third bucket here, these payment plans are going away in June 2028. So if you borrowed between October 2007 and July 1st, 2014, if your first loan was taken out between those two periods, you are eligible for the pay plan, PAYE, which is the same payment calculation as new IBR right here, 10%, 20 years. However, this one is going away in June of 2028. All right, so you have 2 years to continue to make payments on pay and grab payment count towards forgiveness that will carry forward to the next plan. But unfortunately, it is going away in June 2028. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be gone forever. As we've seen over the past 5 years, things change quite a bit, and maybe a more favorable administration might be in place in the future towards student loan policy and might create a new repayment plan that's just as good as pay, right? So never count that out when it comes to changes in the future. I would say that, for folks that are in this situation, that might be a good candidate for forgiveness on pay and they're not eligible for new IBR, so they're eligible for the worst old IBR, which is 15 and 25. You know, what I would say is like as long as you're maintaining a high savings rate with your income on the side, investing at a high savings rate, building up your assets, you shouldn't be no worse off by still remaining passive until we wait until a new administration's in place. Because then you're just still building wealth on the side, and then you could just take that wealth and pay off the loans more aggressively if there's not a new plan, right? And so I always stress that, like, good, sound financial management outside of the student loans and kind of reinforces the student loan policy and gives you more optionality in the long run, depending on what administration's in place, what repayment plans are in place, et cetera. So, so that's the current landscape right now. We have IBR, RAP, Pay, and ICR. And then come June 2028, we're going to have IBR and RAP. Get rid of my drawings. All right. And I will save some time for like kind of like a mini case study to just show like a student loan balance and an income over time and what that payment looks like over time and whether it makes sense to pursue forgiveness for a example dentist and why it makes sense. So what we just talked about, these 20 to 30 year forgiveness timelines are not PSLF forgiveness. Public service loan forgiveness is not as common in dentistry as opposed to like physicians. But It is still a thing, and the most common routes we see to public service loan forgiveness are VA clinics, FQHCs out there, and also teaching at dental schools, right? So all of those tend to be, nonprofit employers, and as long as you're on one of these plans, or I guess these plans even right now, for 120 payments, which is only 10 years, your remaining balance at the end of that 10-year payment journey will be forgiven tax free, right? So that's a really sweet deal as long as the income and work-life balance trade-offs are not as great, right? Because a lot of times what we'll find is that you might be at a private practice working 3 days a week or something like that, and then you switch over to a VA clinic and they're 5 days a week, for that specific clinic. And then you kind of have to like contemplate, like, okay, is this really worth like the next 10 years working 5 days, especially if you're having kids in the future and all of these things, right? So it definitely warrants a discussion of like, you know, thinking outside of just the numbers of obviously getting public service loan forgiveness versus the long-term forgiveness here. So, and you have to be working full time. So that's full time to Department of Ed is 30 hours or more per week, which is in dentistry is typically 4 days a week or more, right? So, but you have to be on one of these plans here. So, um, I don't need to talk too much about this slide because a lot of people like aren't pursuing PSLF, but just there's not the program itself, PSLF, no matter what like the headlines say, PSLF is still very much a program. It's still very much leading to forgiveness for a lot of people out there. But obviously with fewer repayment options, the cost of PSLF is going to go up for a lot of people, right? Just because their payment's going to be higher along the way. If you're like eligible for pay, and then you have to switch to old IBR or RAP or something like that. So that's just one thing there. And then also like if you have some experience working at a nonprofit employer for like, let's say like you took out undergrad loans and you worked at a nonprofit and then you went back to like dental school, technically you could consolidate your loans, combine them all together and get a weighted average payment count for PSLF by doing that. But like I said, it's just not very common that we see those situations for dentists, that having like a kind of like PSLF and then going to dental school in between that. So, for anyone that's let me go to the other big thing that's changed. Prior to starting this, we talked about there's a couple D4s out there. Um, for D4 specifically, um, as long as you don't take out more loans in the future, you're going to have all of these plans available to you. If you are a D4 and then you pursue a residency program starting next year, like started, I guess this year, like later on this year, um, if you borrow after July 1st, 2026, you will not have these options available to you, the IBR plan right here. So all of these will be gone. You're not going to be able to apply for these plans because you borrowed after July 1st, 2026. You will only be stuck to the RAP plan. And if you obviously are pursuing a residency program, more income in the future tends to align with that, being a specialist. And so the likelihood of forgiveness on this RAP plan as a specialist is it's very minimal, the likelihood of that actually happening. If there are means to pay for residency out of pocket, even though it can be obviously extremely expensive, or taking out private loans or family loans, etc. If you're already if you're done borrowing for undergrad, I would encourage you guys to look for that because you could still get a ton of forgiveness on this plan right here, new IBR, right? And not be stuck to the RAP plan, which is 30 years. So something to note there, if anybody is a D4 and is looking to pursue a residency program. So the other thing too is that residency programs and dental school in general, um, they are capping student loan borrowing. for those plans. And so if you're at a dental school, the most you can borrow if you start the dental school, start the program past July 1st, 2026 this year, the most you can borrow per year is $50,000, right? And we know that that's not anywhere close to a lot of times the annual cost of dental school, right? And so the good news is if you're already a D4, you're not capped at the payment, or not capped at borrowing that much. And so it's a good thing in general if you're already through the programs because that means the new entrants to your field will be very much restricted, right? There's just not going to be as many dentists graduating if they enroll in dental school come later this year, simply for financial reasons, right? Because they got to come up with the extra 40,000 or $50,000 to supplement the $50,000 of borrowing for 4 years, right? And that obviously is not easily doable for most people. So your income, supply and demand is a real thing. Your income should grow if you're already through this, and you don't need to worry about that because the new entrants, the supply of dentists should actually shrink a little bit. Not shrink, but it won't grow by as much, is what it should say, because of these caps. Residency programs are going to be capped at 20,500, right? That's nowhere near the cost of a lot of residency programs. So unfortunately, that is the way of student loans policy in the future. So I don't like saying it, but it is what it is. So, okay. And then, um, and we've kind of already talked about this, but the non-PSLF forgiveness is still a real thing as well. Despite the headline risk, we get people every day that get pay forgiveness, IBR forgiveness, um, ICR forgiveness. Some people, but we get people every day that truly reach this forgiveness timeline, and it ranges from 20 years to 30 years, like we mentioned before. And most dentists that are pursuing forgiveness just have a high balance to income ratio. And we'll show you a case study to show you this. But yeah, this is the most likely path towards forgiveness for student loans for dentists out there. If you consolidate in July 1st, 2026, consolidation is not refinancing. It's just combining your federal student loans all together. For some people would want to, I'd say the reason to do that is become fewer and fewer. The reasons to do that would become fewer and fewer in a new world with student loans. But there are reasons to do it in the past. But if you consolidate your loans in July 1st this year or later, you will only be eligible for RAP because it's considered a brand new loan when you consolidate, right? And if you borrow after July 1st, 2026, you're only available for RAP, right? So definitely don't consolidate unless it's clear that it makes sense for you to do so. Um, and we can talk about, if we have some time, we'll talk about why it would make sense to do so. But one thing I wanted to point out here with the IBR plan, this plan has been around for a really long time. It's been around since um, 2001, I believe. So it's been around for close to, or I guess, 25 years now. And the new version came out more recently, July 1st, 2014, there. Um, what IBR and RAP allow is married filing separately. So if anybody that's on the call is married and their spouse is earning income and that income is a substantial amount, you can file your taxes married filing separately and exclude your spouse's income from your payment calculation on your income driven or payment plan, right? So if you're talking about the balance to income ratio, you're really talking about the balance to your income specifically ratio, right? When you're married filing separately. That can equal thousands of dollars of savings per year by filing separately to exclude your spouse's income from their payment calculation, especially if the spouse does not have student loans themselves. Right. So, and we'll talk about another kind of loophole here for community property estates. I know somebody mentioned there in California, community property estate. But if you do this married filing separately, and let's say you earn $400,000 and your spouse doesn't earn any income when you're in a community property state, which is pretty much every state on the West Coast minus Oregon, all the way down to Texas. So New Mexico's down there. Um, Texas is there. Louisiana's one, and then randomly Wisconsin is another one. Um, but if you're in those states, when you file taxes separately, you get to use a specific community property split form that says that says instead of me making 400 and my spouse making zero, which would cost a lot in taxes by filing separately, each of you would make 200,000, right? So $200,000 each. And then when you go and apply for a plan or recertify your income on one of these income-driven repayment plans, it shows $200,000 of income instead of 400,000, right? So that could be a substantial amount of savings per month by using that 200 versus your actual $400,000 income, right? So it's only community property states that you can do that, which is only 9 states. But now let's talk about the new RAP plan. Um, like I said, it's not out until July 1st of this year. This is the Republican-led plan that is kind of overtaking SAVE. So if anyone's on SAVE right now, you are on if you're in a forbearance status, and they just issued a notice about 2 weeks ago that said you are getting kicked off of SAVE. The timing on that communication was very vague. It said something along the lines of the new RAP plan is going to become available in July, and we're going to give you a 90-day notice before we're going to move you to the standard repayment plan, which the standard plan is just a straight 10-year payoff. It's very, very high payments to do that. Um, so after 20 months of save forbearance, for a lot of people that was switched to save 20 months ago or later, or I guess or earlier, would be in this weird kind of save forbearance status that they would have to switch. They have to switch off of it, and they're not getting any credit right now towards forgiveness on this status. And so the Republican-led tax bill that was passed in July of last year introduced this new RAP plan. The thing about this plan that is really intriguing for a lot of people, especially if you're showing low income now and expect to make a lot of income in the future, is that if your monthly payment doesn't cover the interest accrued on your loans per month. So let's say you have $3,000 a month of interest charge on your loans and your RAP payment is $1,000. That extra $2,000 of interest charge is subsidized by the government. So that means that your balance never grows on RAP as long as your payment stays below that interest, right? So you might look at your future income and you're going to say like, oh, I'm going to make 400 or 500,000 and my balance is 300 today, but you might have an old dental school tax return or half dental school, half clinical tax return, and your payment using that would be, I don't know, $500 a month or $1,000 a month. You could temporarily get some interest subsidy at your effective interest rate being very, very low, basically your payments divided by your balance. And that could save you quite a bit of interest for at least like the next 12 months while until you have to show a higher income, right? So it's just like a temporary way to reduce the interest charge on your loans by temporarily switching to RAP when it becomes available. So the SAVE plan had something similar to where you would get an interest subsidy if your payment doesn't cover the interest charge. So the thing is, we expect some restrictions on to be placed on people leaving RAP because logically you might go back to this page and you could say like, okay, why wouldn't I just switch to RAP and then 20 years down the line switch to IBR right here, or 25 years down the line switch to old IBR and get forgiveness immediately with 5 years to go on RAP. And so we expect some restrictions on the ability to move out of the RAP plan once it becomes available. We suspect people will be kind of locked in once they've been on it for long enough to prevent people from doing that. So, are there any borrowers who have parents with Parent Plus loans out there? If there are, can you leave a chat or else I'll skip this one. Okay, we got one. Okay. So Parent Plus, as a result of the tax bill in July of last year, Parent Plus borrowers really didn't didn't turn out favorably from this whole situation. So Parent Plus loans, they are going to be eligible for all the repayment plans that we mentioned before. However, they need to be consolidated by July 1st of this year to be able to be eligible for those plans. So if you have a parent that doesn't make a lot of income, and has a fairly high student loan balance of Parent Plus loans, their income-driven repayment plans will be solely based off of their income. Doesn't matter what you're making, right? Because they are the borrower on the loans, right? So if you have a parent, and especially if they're at a PSLF qualifying employer, so like if your parent's a school teacher, for example, they qualify for PSLF, right? Because they're a public school teacher or they're at a nonprofit. And so they would qualify for PSLF, even though your larger loans in your name might not, right? So, but either way, if you have any inclination that they'd be in a, a situation where the income-driven repayment plans would work out in their favor, that would benefit them, you need to submit a consolidation app to make those Parent Plus loans eligible for those income-driven repayment plans. If you submit the app in June and it doesn't process until after July 1st, you are closed out of the system. You have no income-driven repayment plans available for those parents. If you don't consolidate at all, you have no income-driven repayment plans eligible, and you have to end up paying them off, or your parents do, right? So it's like this weird situation where parent borrowers of Parent Plus loans are going to be completely rid of income-driven repayment plans, and I'd imagine that a lot of them would have, don't have a lot of financial means to pay off their loans. And so there's a ton of lobbying groups right now to say like, what is going on with this? Why are they doing this? But the rules are the rules right now that are published, and that is the rule. So if you have any Parent Plus loans out there and you have not consolidated yet, I would encourage you to do so unless the balance is like way less than their income or at their income, and they're just going to end up paying them off, and then you could refinance at that point. So if you have consolidated, you need to make one payment. It's a weird little, nuance with this tax law. Make one payment on ICR, and then you can move to IBR, which is the lower payment. So you just need to make 1 month of payment on the ICR plan, which is the worst plan, but then you can move to IBR. If your parent has other kids that have not yet gone through undergrad, and they borrow more loans next year for those kids, or maybe later on this year, they lose IDR payment options at that point altogether, even if they've already borrowed for older kids, right? So if you think your parent might benefit from a consult, and you can jump on with them, I would encourage you to do so because there could be a lot of money at stake and a lot of deadlines to hit there. Um, but yeah. Okay, so got about 25 minutes left, so I'll make sure we make this a little bit more interactive, I guess you could say, with some Q&A and some case study here. Um, but what you should do now, Parent Plus loan borrowers, we just mentioned, like if you haven't consolidated yet, and your parent makes a moderate to low income, chances are you should consolidate like ASAP today and get that consolidation app processed before July 1st, right? If you're on safe forbearance, I would encourage you to switch to another plan, right? And use likely, if you haven't filed your 2025 tax return, that's great because you can use your 2024 at this point. That might show lower income. So switch to a plan while you have the opportunity to use that lower income. If you filed 2025 already, either way, it's probably going to be less income that you're earning this year. And so I would encourage you to just get back in repayment if you're on safe forbearance, right? Get payment count because every payment you make today on your forgiveness timeline is one less payment you have to make when your income is going to be substantially higher, most likely, right? Lower your overall cost of forgiveness, get back on the repayment train. If you're pursuing PSLF, I would say in general, unless you have like a career change in the midst of PSLF, it's probably not going to be a good candidate. You're probably not going to be a good candidate for consolidation unless you like had some high PSLF count on some undergrad loans. You get a weighted average there. But if you're pursuing PSLF, continue to submit the ECF form through the VA or through your FQHC, um, and continue to, get payment count. If you're on safe forbearance and pursuing PSLF, get on one of these plans, right? Get payment count towards PSLF counted instead of sitting on safe forbearance. Even if your cash flow is tight right now, come up with creative ways to reduce expenses outside of student loan payments because your best bet is to get payment right now at these income levels because it's not going to get any better from a spending front if um, over time just in general. It's a really hard thing to do. So, and then think about going back to the first slide, think about your situation. If you are in the situation where your balance is greater than 2 times your annual income, get into repayment, find ways to, you know, lower your AGI, file taxes separately if you're married, um, find ways to reduce your overall cost of forgiveness. Consider booking a consult at that point. But either way, just get into repayment and try to find ways to reduce your taxable income. So that way you can lower your student loan payment that these plans are based off of. So, and then lastly, the 5 most common mistakes. I won't go through all 5 of these, but the biggest ones that I see personally are refinancing too early. Once you refinance, you can't go back to the federal system. There are no income-driven repayment plans for refinancing loans, right? So they don't care how much money you make. All they care about is your balance and your interest rate. The other thing about student loans or federal student loans is they have death and disability discharge, right? So refi student loans don't typically have those. So if you were to become totally and permanently disabled, you get your loans discharged tax free. And if you die, your loans get discharged tax free and your heirs don't have to worry about paying them. If you refi, that's not the case for most of the cases out there. So definitely make sure you're a strong candidate to pay off with a balanced to income ratio that we talked about. Second, putting off big life goals. I will tell you that you do not need to wait on your loans to be $0 before you get married, buy your first home, start your practice, you name it. Don't put off those big life goals just because you have student loans. Think of your income-driven repayment student loan payment as simply a tax to your income. If your income drops, you can always recalculate your payment, right? And when you go and apply for a mortgage, the mortgage lender will not care about your balance. All they will care about is your payment, your debt payment on your student loans compared to your overall income overall. So as long as your debt payments divided by your income don't exceed a certain percent, they will approve the mortgage. And in fact, dentists have physician mortgages or doctor mortgages out there for a low down payment. So, and then secondarily, I would say third, the most common mistake I see is not committing to the passive aggressive route. So, like I mentioned before, if you're a good candidate for forgiveness, don't pay any extra on your loans because you're effectively what you're doing is you're paying a dollar to save your tax bill of 37 cents on that dollar in 15 years from now, right? And that just the math just doesn't math to do that. So, and then you can use this QR code for free calculators to plug in your income, your borrowing dates to see which plans you qualify for and see what an estimated payment would look like and your cost of forgiveness over time. Here, if you want to use those this QR code or studentloanplanner.com/calc here. And then what we just to break down like exactly what we do 1 hour student loan consultations for clients, and the price is typically $5.95 per consult. And our goal is to obviously far exceed that in the form of savings compared to the costs. And we have 3 months of email support that comes along with it. If you want help like enacting the plan, like switching the plan, filing taxes, you know, enrolling in your 401k, you name it, like whatever comes with your strategy. If you have any questions along the way for the next 3 months after our consultation, you're more than welcome to send me an email or send one of our consultants an email for that. And then you'll get $100 off the 595 price with this QR code here for being a part of the webinar. All right. So typically what I'll do is I will move to kind of like a case study to show. um, the benefits of forgiveness and when it might make sense to pay off. Um, but I do want to make sure if there are some questions out there, I do want to make sure everyone's questions get answered. And so I will start with that, and then we'll move over to the case study. So
Okay. Thank you, Jake.
yeah,
So we did have one question in the Q&A area. So they asked, what happens if we are enrolled in PSLF but pay our loan balance off prior to the 10-year forgiveness? Would the forgiveness balance still be tax-free?
well, so then there would be no balance to forgive, right? So then you would basically disqualify yourself from PSLF. Right. So if you're in a situation, and this is what my hunch with that question is, if you're in a situation where you get some sort of like grant every year from like there's a lot of like N what is it, NH or NHRA grant or NHSC grant. Um, Best practice is to take that grant amount and spread it out over 12 months of payments and then pay, hopefully you time it up to where you can get 24 months of payments for one grant disbursement. And there's ways to do that, but your goal with PSLF would be to get payment count at the lowest cost. And if you're getting like grant money, then I would encourage you to try to spread it out to get the most amount of payments because you can only prepay up to 12 months with PSLF. And then any amount above the 12 months of total payments, you're not going to get PSLF credit for that. So,
Okay. And then I had a question as
sure.
well. Do you have any other reasons other than the parent plus to consolidate or justify consolidating?
Sure. Um, the Here, I think what I'll do is I'll pop open a spreadsheet to just formulate some thoughts here of why you'd want to do it. Let me share my screen one more time. Okay. Can you see this okay?
Yes.
Okay. So the first one would be Parent Plus loans to be eligible for income-driven repayment plans. Second, there are certain loans out there called Perkins, HPSL loans, and LDL loans that are like pseudo federal loans. They're made like directly with the universities. Um, as they sit, they are not eligible for PSLF or any income-driven repayment plan. So a lot of times, if you have a servicer that's called ECSI, um, they're one of the three here. You can make those eligible for PSLF and income-driven repayment plans if you consolidate those two federal loans, right? So it's direct consolidation loans. The third, which is not as common for dentists, is if you have PSLF count for undergrad loans, you could consolidate and make and grab that weighted average count for all of your loans. Like if you have grad plus loans from dental school that don't have any PSLF count or have very little PSLF count, and you have undergrad loans that have, let's say, 2 or 3 years of PSLF count because you, I don't know, had some other career outside of dentistry before you enrolled in dental school, you could consolidate and grab the weighted average payment count for all of your loans into one big consolidation loan. So you kind of speed up your PSLF timeline. But outside of these three reasons, to us, consolidation isn't worth the downside that we still don't know for a fact if it's going to reset your IDR payment count to the 20 or 25. We just don't know until we know with our sample size of clients, right? So um, these would be the only three reasons to consolidate at this point, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Uh, Anyone else have any questions?
Looks like we have one more in the chat. It asks with PSLF, you can also have different repayment plan options. Oh, it might be just a content. a statement that you can pay on that qualify for the PSLF. Is that correct?
So all of the income-driven repayment plans,
Okay.
right? So if we go back to this, today, all of these plans, if you're enrolled full-time, 30 plus hours a week, at a nonprofit, when I say enroll, I guess you're working full-time at a nonprofit and you're on one of these plans, you'll get PSLF count as long as you're in a repayment status. You can't be in like a forbearance status or something like that. The other plan that does count is this 10-year standard repayment plan. But obviously, if you're on that too long, you just end up paying off the loans anyway in 10 years. So yeah, you just have to be on an income-driven repayment plan or the 10-year standard repayment plan, which most of the time it's like these are going to be a cheaper payment than the 10-year. Yeah. So, so you can't be on like the extended repayment plan or graduated repayment plan or any of those.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
I don't think we have any more questions. Oh wait, yes we do.
I won't.
So to clarify, is there a tax bomb if you pay off your loans before the 10 years under PSLF?
No, no, no. The only reason there would ever be a tax bomb is if you pursue non-PSLF forgiveness. So the 20 or 25 or 30-year forgiveness, and there is a remaining balance, right? The tax bomb is simply the remaining balance that's forgiven times your tax rate, right? So if you already paid off your loans, like there's going to be no remaining balance. And so there's no tax bomb. And even with PSLF forgiveness in general, it's a tax-free forgiveness if you do have remaining balance at the end of the forgiveness. So there's with PSLF, there's no tax bomb at all. So, all right. With that being said, unless there's any more, I'll switch over to like a quick case study to show the math. Okay. All right.
It's like we do have one more. And
One
feel
more.
free
Okay.
to, yeah, sorry, feel free to keep adding these to the chat, guys.
Okay.
When you say annual income, is that before or after taxes?
Yeah. So great question. It's there's a lot of nuance to this. It is primarily AGI, adjusted gross income, which is simply like your gross income minus traditional 401k contributions, health insurance premiums, anything that you kind of see on your pay stub that is deductible, right? As like against your gross income to get to your taxable income, right? So AGI there would be like it's called like below, above the line deductions there, AGI. It's line 11 on your form 1040, which is your tax return. So when you're talking about like mortgage interest deductions, um, charitable contributions, all of those happen after AGI in your tax return. And so those don't reduce your student loan payment. These things do, right? So like an easy low-hanging fruit, if you have the cash flow, would be to simply try to max fund your 401k if you have one available. 24,500 is the max this year. And think about like if you're on pay as you earn or new IBR, that lowers your student loan payment by $2,450 for the year, right? So divide that by 12 and you've got like $200 a month, right? That lowers your student loan payment by. So but yeah, so it's AGI after above the line deductions, which typically you see like in your pay stub. If you're a business owner, it'll be after your business deductions as well, like your business expenses. If you're a 1099 associate or something like that. So, yeah. Okay. So I will run a quick scenario here. So let's say someone has $500,000 of federal student loan balance and they have no payment count up to this point. So they missed out on COVID forbearance. Let's say they've been in safe forbearance this whole time, not getting any payment count towards forgiveness. And let's say they make 150 today. What I and let's say their 2025 tax return is like that half year of making like 6 months of 150. So they made like 75, and then they make 150 on their next tax return. And then let's say they're married to someone making also 150. And then let's say that their income grows by 5% a year. Let's say that you at least outpace inflation by a couple percent here. So by the end of this time frame, it's 221, and this is after 401k contributions, right? So clearly going back to like our first slide, balance to income ratio. I mean, we've got, 500 divided by 150. That's like 3 and a little bit, right? So compare that ratio, right? So 3x. So they would be good candidates for forgiveness as long as they don't show their entire income, right? So I'll show you a payment on pay, or I guess new IBR for this person, if they're filed jointly, if they showed 75,000 and 150 for their spouse, if they filed jointly with one child, we'll say, is 1534 a month, right? If they filed separately and exclude their spouse's income, their payment goes down to 284 a month, right? So just by doing that, that saves, we'll call it about $1,200 a month times 12 saves about $14,000 a year in student loan payment just by tax filing status, right? So if this person did this every year, and this is what their AGI looked like over time, and they don't have any payment count up to this point, this is kind of what their payment would look like on each plan, right? So here is new IBR, this is wrap, and then new IBR and pay are the same right now with the payment calculation. But you can see every payment made right now is one less payment down here when they're making 400,000, $500,000, right? So that's why I stress so much get into repayment as soon as possible, and and you know basically just start getting payment count towards forgiveness. Um, so going to this, I don't know why. Oh yeah, that's why. Okay. So you can see there on the wrap plan, there's a huge jump between year one and year two. And it's because when you're on the wrap plan, and your AGI is over 100,000, it'll be 10% of your AGI. But if your income is under 100,000, it'll be a lockstep percent of your AGI. So like if you're between 70 and 80, it'll be 7% of your AGI. If you're below 20 and 30, it'll be 2% of your AGI. So it's like almost just like a cascading effect. Like the more that you could reduce down the next like $10,000, the better off you'd be. So like if you're in this position, like there's no doubt in my mind, you should try to find another way to get $5,001 into your 401k to get to $69,999, right? So that'll lower your payment there on wrap. Like that is just kind of like a weird nuanced plan that it's never been like this, but that's just the way it is. But that's why there's such a big difference between year one and year two because you're over 100 there. So, so if this person was new IBR eligible, this would say this person makes $355,000 of payments along the way over the next 20 years. The remaining balance is 744, right? So we can see that like here is the balance growing over time. Let me go to this one right here. It goes from 500 to 526. Your payments get a little bit higher, so it starts paying off a little bit more interest every month. But you end up getting 744 forgiven. 37%, which is the highest tax bracket today. There's only two states that tax federal student loan forgiveness, and I think like Mississippi is one of them. I forget the other one, but it's not very populous states. But 37% top federal tax bracket times 744 is 275. You pay this along the way, and it kind of goes up in lockstep with your income, right? Here. And then in year 20, you pay this in the form of your tax bomb, right? So all combined, you pay 630. In today's dollars, 2026 dollars, that equivalent cost is 314, right? Just to put this into perspective, if you paid off your loans in 10 years, you pay 666 over 10 years. So the question for the group would be, would you rather pay 630 over 20 years and actually not the majority, but the big chunk of that happens in year 20? Or would you rather pay 666,000 over 10 years? Right? And it's pretty obvious that this is why this person's a great candidate for forgiveness is because they actually save the most amount of money by being passive on their loans. And it only takes them $730 a month of investment contributions to get to 275 in 20 years. Right? So the math works out for this person because of their balance to income ratio if they file separately. Here you can see on the wrap plan, their balance is only 215, but because it's an extra 10 years and their income just does nothing but go up over time, the payments are exceptionally higher, right, over that time frame. And so that leads to a $1 million cost over 30 years. And the tax bound's only 79 because this doesn't grow, right? And actually start paying it down a little bit. So this is exactly what we do in consultations. Somebody presents their student loan file. We'll ask them to send it to us. We'll run the numbers, see what their payment count is so far, see what their marriage situation's like, their tax filing status, all of that, and we'll prescribe a path forward to does it make sense to switch to another plan and be passive, or does it make sense to refinance? And here's what rates are like right now. Like, if we get to a 20-year and 5% loan, this the cost here. If we get to a 5-year loan and 4.5%, you're still paying $9,300 a month, even though you're paying 4.5% in interest, right? And that's not fun to pay either in that case. So yeah. So I know we got 1 minute. Any last questions you guys see?
I guess someone just clarifying does 403B count if you don't have 401k for your
Yep.
AGI?
Yeah, yeah. If you're working at a nonprofit and you have a 403B, yeah, definitely. I would encourage you to do pre-tax contributions, right? Because you get that extra 10 or 15% of tax rate in the form of your student loan payment that you get to deduct. And 457s if you also have that as well. Sometimes you'll have those too.
Alrighty. So if there's no more questions, Jake, thank you so much for being here with us today and presenting your wealth of knowledge
Yeah, you're welcome.
about all things student loans. I definitely found today useful. I'm pretty sure our attendees did as well.
Great.
And just a request for everyone who tuned in today. If you guys could make sure you look out for a questionnaire at the end and fill it out so that we could get you guys your CE credits. It'd be much appreciated. And I appreciate all of you, including Jake, for taking time out of your Sunday to be with us today.
Yeah. Thank you guys for joining.
Yeah.
And check us out at studentloanplanner.com if you want to find out more about what we do and use our calculators and whatnot.
Okay, thank you so much. And everybody have a good rest of your weekend.